Welcome to another episode of Becoming an Ayn Rand Hero, where we apply the ideas of Ayn Rand and objectivism to create a life with the qualities and the character of Ayn Rand's heroes, to live a life that we consider to be heroic, that we can't wait to wake up to. And today, I'm speaking with Matthew Zachary Johnson, aka Matt, a composer and author of a couple books, but his latest book on emotions in life and music, we'll be getting into it, really fascinated me when I read it. It covers a lot of ground. At first I read this book, it's going to be about music and composing, and isn't this nice? I like that. But no, this is a deep, profound book about human consciousness and the way music relates to human consciousness and values. I wanted Matt on my show. So, Matt, welcome to Becoming an Ayn Rand Hero. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, great. So, as I just said, you are a composer, a music theorist, and other things. How do you describe your life, your career, what you're up to? I'm curious how you look at that.
Usually the lead title is composer because that's the main thing that I'm interested in, but I've been a teacher for a long time and a writer, and I've done some theater work, so there's that aspect of things too.
A musical
so
about horror? A horror musical or something like this?
Actually,
no.
Yes,
actually, we're starting right there. How
All right.
is it that you wrote that musical and the patriotism music? Okay, so musicals.
Okay.
You're a composer.
Yeah.
How did you write this horror musical? I was curious about that.
Okay, well, do let me step back one step, which is I wrote an opera about the Boston Tea Party, which was this huge grand opera that we did at the Fringe Festival downtown in New York. And immediately after that was done, I was totally worn out. But I saw this advertisement for a Halloween theater festival at the Players Theater, and the deadline was coming up. And so somehow that just really appealed to me. It was the total opposite of what I had just done with the opera. And it was supposed to be super delimited, right? Because each of the shows is a maximum of 20 minutes, and then you combine 4 shows into one night. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, let me give it a shot. And, if it doesn't go anywhere, who cares? And so in 2 days, I wrote this little script, and I said to myself, well, I'm not even going to write the music unless they accept the show. And then they did accept the show. So then I scrambled to write the music and get a director and cast the show, and on and on and on. But it turned out to be a lot of fun. It's a very compact show. And it's a horror farce with an underlying kind of zinger philosophical theme.
Wait. You added a zinger philosophical theme to something that you did? So audience, you don't know this yet, but oh yeah, how surprising.
Yes. And actually, one of the people who was on the committee that accepted the play told me informally once, she said, I read your show and I loved it and I hated it. And I said, that's how you're supposed to feel.
Yes.
It's called the Can Opener. And I'm actually now in the beginning stages of putting together a short film of that show. So everybody can see it.
Good, because that way I can see it, or I can
Absolutely.
see a version of it, and I can get the philosophical zinger in it.
Exactly.
Yes. This show, Becoming an Ayn Rand Hero. Yeah. I run in a lot of circles, so my home context is not so much the Ayn Rand community.
Yeah.
Right. I do a lot of transformational work and spiritual work and business work, and most of the places in life where Ayn Rand is hated by people who don't know what she ever wrote.
Hmm.
right? By the way, I've noticed that the less people know about what she's written, the more they hate her, it seems.
Oh yes. Oh
Yes,
yes.
which is intriguing information. But so one of the things I love about becoming an Ayn Rand hero, about my work and the way that I approach Ayn Rand and the way that I speak about her, is that people find my arguments to be extraordinarily compelling and helpful and insightful.
Good.
And they hate that they're also Ayn Rand, because they're supposed to hate Ayn Rand, but they like my ideas. And that
Right.
philosophical zinger, it's like to be able to say, oh yeah, this is basically straight Ayn Rand, what I just taught you. And they're like, but no,
Yeah.
but I like it. I'm not supposed to like it. So I'm imagining the philosophical zinger in the piece is something like that.
Oh yes. Well,
Okay.
actually, I think my thematic message in this show is probably a little different from what she would have said, actually, because she was more how do I put it, accepting of the importance of academia than I am.
Okay, and this brings us
That's
to
my nice way of saying.
that's your nice way of putting
it.
it. Excellent. So, oh good. Oh good. So it's an anti-academic piece. so this brings us to Ayn Rand.
Yeah.
Right. So how did you get involved with, intrigued with? What was your encounter? What's your kind of your origin story about Ayn Rand? How did she come into your consciousness? What impact did she have?
Well, basically, I really wish I had found out about her work earlier, like when I was 8. Not that I would have read Atlas Shrugged when I was 8 or anything. But when I went away to college, my mother's boyfriend gave me The Fountainhead. And it was sitting on my bookshelf, and I didn't read it. My roommate at one of the breaks said, I need a book to read. Do you mind if I take one off of your shelf? I said, sure, go ahead. And so he read The Fountainhead. And when he finished it, he said, wow, that completely changed the way I look at the world. And partly because of his glowing recommendation, and partly out of sheer competitiveness, I read the book, this big book. And so I read it, and I really liked it. I had experiences in the past of being disappointed by authors' second book. So I had a big question mark in my head, sort of holding back my enthusiasm because of this experience I had that I read the first book and I love it. I read the second book and I say, well, this is just the same thing over again. There's nothing original in the second book. Or just be disappointed in some way with the later work. So I thought maybe that was going to happen. And so then I went out and got myself Atlas Shrugged. And
even bigger book. Ugh.
Yeah, right. But there was no direct competition on that. So I read that, and then I just thought, wow, I mean, everything is different. And after that, I went straight to the bookstore, and I bought every book I could find that had her name on it. So that was the beginning of a long-standing influence of her on me.
And how would you describe the impact that had? I mean, you were on a certain path, you were kind of approaching life from a particular way, and then you encountered her work.
Yeah.
And what kind of impact did that have on you?
Well, the big problem I faced in life was confusion and disappointment about people. And I felt that I just couldn't understand people and was not having success interacting with people in a way that made me happy at all. So it was a revelation to me. Basically, it's a whole worldview change. But to have the idea presented to me that people can be understood and that you can understand in words what makes people tick and what their motivation is. And even when people are doing and the way in which it doesn't make sense. That sounds like a paradox, which it kind of is. But she gave me the tools for understanding people and dealing with people, and so that was a revelation to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I might have some more questions down that road because
Yeah.
Ayn Rand she's an acquired taste, right?
Okay. What makes you put it that way?
It's that the more you enter into her world,
Yeah.
the more you go, hey, this is a different. I kind of like this world. I kind of like this world. And then you go, oh, well, this is kind of it. And then you read more of her, and you're like, wow, this is a rich world.
Exactly.
And the more I find, the more that I study her, the more that I enter into her world, the more that I allow her to challenge me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because she makes statements. She says this. Think about it this way. Notice the distinction between X and Y. And, wow, okay. The more I take that on, the more I recognize her world and the more I love it, which makes me want to learn more about it, which has me love it more, which has me learn more. And in the process, my own personal story, I was a postmodern socialist when I encountered Atlas Shrugged. Right? And so she just ripped my world apart.
Uh-huh.
She just ripped it apart. But it was right. Like her critique was just more true. And so my shift in how I understood the world, how I related to other people, how I understood other people, how I understood myself, how I understood what I'm going to do in the world, how do I actually creatively apply my talents.
Mm-hmm.
Like all of that shifted for me. So I'm always interested in the real impact. So when you encountered her work, as you got into it, the more you learned about it, it shifts how you approach every other part of your life because it's fundamental.
Absolutely.
And that's the part that particularly interests me. My thing is I'm about thriving. Mm-hmm. I call my work the game of thriving. Mm-hmm. Right? And I say it's in the game of thriving, the more you play, the better your life gets. Mm-hmm. Right? Because it's just about how do you make your life better? That's really what I care about. Now, rationality, reality, responsibility, respect, realization, like the key ideas, that's how you make your life better. And Ayn Rand is, for me, a tool in the project of making your life better. I like discussing epistemology and ethics and politics and aesthetics and metaphysics. I enjoy that. But for me, it's really about how does it make your life better? What is the impact that it has such that once you encounter the ideas, once you dialogue with her, once you engage, how does it make your life better? So I'll probably ask you more questions about that.
Okay.
So you're in college. What were you studying?
At first in college, I was a business major, and I had a minor in music. And over time, I think that the business major was too easy, and the music major was challenging and a whole rich area. And so the music area sort of grew and grew and grew in importance to me, and the business area receded into secondary importance. And so that's how I ended up studying music. Basically, I had prior experiences, like when I was a teenager, I basically was listening to big, powerful Russian orchestral music and thinking, oh yeah, that, I want to do that. That's what I want to do. And so as I got into my head that is something I could do, and maybe, hey, I could be just as good as those guys. What if I could actually work so hard as to be just as good as those guys? So that was a huge driving force for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And by the way, what you just said sounds to me, I'm always listening for Ayn Rand hero. Like, what would an Ayn Rand hero say? How would an Ayn Rand hero describe it? What's the attitude that an Ayn Rand hero would take towards this? There's the thing. What would Jesus do?
Yeah.
Well, I'm always like, okay, so what would Francisco do?
Yeah.
What would Rourke
well, he's
do?
actually Yeah, Francisco is the one that came to mind for me because the huge thing that really stands in my mind about him is the way he says, he's running a copper company, right? And okay, so I need to know metallurgy, and I need to know accounting, and I need to know geography, and I need to know geology, and I need to know shipping, and it's like all of these things are relevant and useful to him, and he's motivated to know them because of the way that they connect back to the root purpose. But that root purpose then extends out to every subject in some way or another because everything's interconnected. So it was that integrating core combined with expansive interest in the whole world that I thought was just amazing.
Yes, and again, you wrote a book about emotions and life and music, but it goes everywhere. Goes everywhere. So
it's like music is the core thing, and then it's expanding out to everything.
Yes, right. Because you want to make great music.
Exactly.
Right, and greatness that's human, and it goes everywhere. Okay, so but what you said was something along the lines of I can work hard enough to become great at this, to become that good at something. And that I listen, that is an Ayn Rand hero attitude. The Ayn Rand hero attitude is, I want to do that? No problem. I will just work hard, be smart. I will figure it out. I'll find out how it connects with all the things. I'll just learn all the things I need to do in order to be great at it. And then I will become great at it. And the greatness of that makes all of it purposeful. It makes all of it meaningful. It makes all of it beautiful because it's my life. I'm creating it. I decide. I do that. Anyway, I heard that.
Right. So there's a great quote from Johann Sebastian Bach that is right on this idea, which is, I have worked hard, and anyone who works as hard can do the same. And it's a perfect pull quote, kind of a life motto.
Yes. And it is the Enlightenment idea. Right? We could say right now right now there's a large movement of, you could say, the penultimate multiculturalism, which is the recognition that each art form has its own beauty, you could say, and therefore each culture has its own beauty, and therefore all cultures are beautiful, and some cultures have been privileged, and we need to help the marginalized cultures and we sometimes summarize that as social justice warriors.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Yes, we're familiar with this. And you could say that quote from Johann Sebastian Bach is the antithesis of the social justice warrior mentality, right?
Of the entitlement mentality and the race, class, and gender mentality.
Yes, of the mentality that Johann Sebastian Bach says, you can be a great composer, like I am a great composer, if you will do the work that I have done. Right? That it's not about my sex or my race or my gender or my religion. None of that. It is the work that I have done that allows you to be this kind of great composer. Right? And that idea, essential Ayn Rand, it's this idea that rationality is what matters. It's how you use your mind. And, as Rourke said, the question is not who's going to let me, it's who's going to stop me.
Right.
Right. Or although it was separated by a sentence in the book, but it's, look, I get to determine what I create in my life. It is not other people who determine what I create in my life. It is I and the work that I do. And if I do the work, I can become great at what I do.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and this leads into aesthetics.
It certainly does.
Right. And you could say if we were to say that that's a summary of Ayn Rand's aesthetics, in the sense that the desire to be great and the capacity for greatness and judging something based on its greatness
Yes.
is essential to what beauty and aesthetics is. I offer that as an opening salvo in a conversation about aesthetics, how you understand aesthetics, how you understand Ayn Rand understands aesthetics, and how that leads into your book. Because I want to start transitioning into your book, but I want to do it through the idea of aesthetics. And
Okay. Well, the first thing that came to mind as you were introducing that idea was the distinction of the thematic content of the work or the message that the work conveys versus the skill of the artist in conveying that message. So content and technique, or substance and style, however you want to give the terminology. Because greatness can come across in both of those. And sometimes it comes across only in one. Pretty rarely do we know works of art that convey human greatness in a style that's inept. Usually you have like a Michelangelo where it's conveying human greatness in a way that is greatness in the level of skill that's used to portray it. And more often today, people focus only on technique and skill, and they wouldn't use the word greatness, but skill and efficacy or effectiveness of technique, and then are just agnostic about whether greatness or virtue needs to be conveyed in the content of a work of art. So that a well-made film about zombies taking over the world or something, people would just say that's fine. It's a good movie because it's good and it's effective.
it has excellent cinematography, and the pacing was good, the editing was fast,
great makeup, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So then a big part of what I'm challenging is the tendency that people have of evaluating technique but not substantive message. And that is a big deal in music, because I don't know that there's any kind of music where people are drawn to incompetent technique. I just don't think that exists. So the whole issue with music is its theme. What statement does the song or piece make? And that's an area that people don't think about or talk about, and that's too bad. So basically that's what I'm taking on, is this question of, okay, so how do we actually unpack what music is saying and what statement it makes, and what theme that comes across as a universal fact versus, there's personal meaning that a person can have with a song. This song reminds me of my dad. This song pulls an image of the beach into my mind, and it's very pleasant. Those are individual factors, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's also the question of the universal element, that the message of the piece that's the same for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so the big question with music is, can there be such a message? How do you know that? How do you prove it? How do you establish it? And then if there is one universal message that a piece has, people get scared, because it's like, well, isn't that oppressive? Isn't that going to say that some people are right and some people are wrong? Isn't that going to mean that it's either good or bad? And all of these are very scary things, because it's uncharted territory. It's not an area where people have learned to feel safe because they're unacquainted with it.
And you could say, so sometimes I like to simplify my philosophy in terms of coaching, in terms of life thing, is I like to say, don't be an idiot, don't be an asshole.
Okay.
Right? Like if you summarize what is it in terms of living a good life, right? Don't be an idiot, don't be an asshole.
Yeah.
Right. Now, being an idiot.
That's a good kick yourself in the butt way of thinking of it, because it's no nonsense.
Yes. And I like this. I like no nonsense. Let's cut through all the bullshit. Come on, really. You have to live. You have to make choices today. What are you going to do? Okay. So don't be an idiot means make distinctions, make smart
Mm-hmm.
choices, distinguish between good and bad, better and worse, and choose accordingly. Right? In the realm of aesthetics, there's the theme, there's what the piece of literature is focused on, what the music is focused on, what's the theme of the music, and then there's the technical proficiency, the artistry with which you convey the theme. And both of those,
Yeah.
for a work to be great, both of those must be in place.
Right. Absolutely.
That's good. The higher the theme, the deeper the theme, the more meaningful, the more human and beautiful the theme, and the better the execution
Mm-hmm.
and the creation of it, the greater the work. That there is a better and there is a worse.
Right.
Right? And that
Yeah. And
is fundamental. Every part of your life, you're choosing between better and worse. And you need to be smart about the standards you use for what is better and what is worse.
yeah.
Right? AKA, don't be an idiot.
That's the shorthand way.
Yes.
Putting it.
Now, once you say better and worse, once you say that there is a better and there is a worse, when you bring that fact into interpersonal dynamics,
Yeah.
it gives you a tremendous opportunity to be an asshole and say, look, I am better than you. The thing that you are, the thing that you care about is worse. You are less than. I can dominate you by claiming the high ground. I claim the moral high ground. I claim the aesthetic high ground. I claim the philosophical, the political high ground. And in the process, I might even be accurate. It might be better. It might really be better. But if I use it to dominate you, that's being an asshole.
Right.
Right? Now, I like to say that when most people are assholes, they invoke some kind of better worse. And so there's this equation where people think better and worse means being an asshole. If you're going to talk about being better or worse, you're basically going to be an asshole. And so the solution to that is we don't like people being assholes, so we're not going to talk about better and worse.
Right.
La 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 la. Right. We're just not going to talk about what's better and what's worse, because that way we won't be assholes.
Because it's all good.
Because it's all good. Because right. And that's the thing. There is a better and a worse. Don't be an idiot. And don't be an asshole. Like, let's talk about better and worse in a way that has us grow rather than as a way of trying to dominate one another.
Right, like beating somebody over the head with your evaluation.
Yes.
Which does no good whatsoever.
Yes, it does no good, but it's very difficult to avoid. Because as soon as you say there is better and worse, some people are going to go, hey, you're attacking me. And then they get defensive. Yeah. And then you're all, what are you defensive about, you idiot?
Yeah.
Right? And then,
I'm just thinking through some historical examples because of the way the world is today. People are very much wanting to distance themselves from value judgments. If you think about the Victorian period, for instance, people had an interesting combination then of strong value judgments and tolerance. Same thing in ancient Rome, that there was Roman law that treated everyone the same, and Rome was a crossroads. And because it was a crossroads and a market culture, you had to be able to trade with people from different places who look different, who speak different languages, who listen to different music, et cetera, without, as you said, being an asshole, because all your customers would go away. And so that combination of value judgments, this is a bargain, this is shoddy work, I'm going to buy this, I'm not going to buy that. The very firm value judgments existed in coinciding with people being non-asshole-ish in terms of how they interact with other people, except for Julius Caesar and some exceptions like that.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to jump around history a little
No.
bit to get some contrast with the attitudes that people have today, which are so soaked in subjectivism.
Yes, yes. And so anytime you could say that there's the dominant philosophy is anytime someone says that something is better or worse, they must be attacked.
Yeah,
They
it's
must
bigotry,
be
it's chauvinism.
delegitimized.
Yes, exactly. It's bigotry, it's chauvinism, it's something phobic. I mean, go down the list of phobias. It's what are the terms that people use for the isolationist and all those kinds of nativist and so on, which everybody knows those things are primitive and bad mindsets to have, but they get just sprayed around so indiscriminately, these accusations, that they start to mean nothing.
Yes, yes. Okay, great, great. So with this, that there's the theme of the music, the
Yeah,
theme of the literature,
yeah,
the theme of the art,
yeah.
right? I will go so far as to say the theme of your life, the theme of
Hmm.
your relationships. It's like these are the parallels. And then there's the execution. There's the artistry of the technique with which you express that theme. All right. Now,
Exactly.
in your book, Emotions in Life and Music,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to say some things about your book, right? And I'm
I'll show
hoping
everybody what it
I'm
is.
hoping that. Oh yes, by the way, yeah, no, put it right in the camera. So, by the way, I highly recommend this book. It will make you think. It will make you think, and that's what's important. It will challenge you, and I found it quite insightful. I'm when we met at a conference. Um, I mentioned very quickly, my brother is a composer, and was a concert pianist, and so I grew up listening to music, listening to concert piano because he was older than me, and he would practice
Hmm.
hours and hours and hours a day, and so I would listen to it. So music is has a very special place in my consciousness,
Hmm.
and the development and what it's like to play a piece with both accurately, so that all of the
Hmm.
notes fit, and with style, so that
Hmm.
you're actually emphasizing different notes in order to bring out the highlight. This is something that's very, very
Yeah.
important to me. And so reading your
Hmm.
book was fun for me because you're giving me words for all kinds of things that I experience that I hadn't had words for, and therefore I didn't understand. Like I had an intuitive sense of it, and I'm reading
Yeah.
your book and I'm like, oh, like it was fitting in place. So fantastic. So I'm going to say some things
I'm,
about.
I'm, I'm glad to hear you say that because that is what I wanted to do.
And I think you did a brilliant job at it. I think anyone who finds value in music, who takes pleasure from it, can read your book and multiply their ability to understand and appreciate their response to music and music itself orders of magnitude. I mean, just it's like no brainer. If you care about music, this book will just give you a whole new level of appreciation. It will also challenge all kinds of thoughts that you have. Yes, this is the kind of book I like. Okay. So I'm going to tell you some thoughts I have about your book, and
All
then
right.
you get to
All
go,
right.
I guess I
Here,
can.
he-
Having
here we
written
go.
books, I love it when people tell me about my books. Okay, so one of the things about your book that I very much liked is that you could say one of its fundamental premises, and I'll ask you to correct me and etc.
Mhm.
One of the fundamental premises is that there is a reason why we respond emotionally to music, right? It is not some
Absolutely.
magical thing. There's a reason for it. And the reason fundamentally is that music has a number of parameters and dynamics,
Hmm.
right? In terms of its intensity and its speed and the nature of how the sounds work with one another,
Yeah.
right? And those dynamics, the dynamics of the music, actually move our own internal emotional dynamics. That we have similar dynamics. That there is a congruence between the kind of changes that we do in music and the kind of changes that we feel in our actual phenomenological emotional experience. And therefore, because
Right.
of that, when you change the dynamics of the music, if you're really paying attention, if you're listening, it literally changes your experience in time with the music. And
Absolutely.
therefore, music and emotions are two variations of a theme that you can capture dynamics in music that are the dynamics of emotion. And therefore music can move you, but music can also tell you about your emotions in terms of what you're attracted to, that there's this link that music gives you insight into yourself and a capacity to expand and refine yourself.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Okay.
And a capacity to, just to add on to the end of that, capacity to introduce new elements into your psyche, whether good or not, hopefully good, and to drill them. It's like repeating an exercise, only in this case it's an emotional exercise, that you are basically installing something in your soul and emblazoning it in your soul. You have the capacity of saying no to it, which counteracts that if you think the music is not a good influence. But that is a very profound form of influence. There's only one culture, literally only one in all of world history, that has plainly said so, and that was the ancient Greeks. And people pore over the very, very small philosophical statements that hint about that in ancient Greek philosophy, and often are baffled by them. But it's very profound what they were onto. But their concept was ethos. Obviously, it's the root word of ethics, and it meant the ethical power of music, the moral power of music. And world religions, generally speaking, incorporate an implicit idea that music is a moral influence, that it should be used in a certain way in church services, and it's controlled and there are proper rules for how you do everything in various religions musically because of the influence on music on the spiritual experience. And so that Greek idea is present in many world religions also, though implicitly. But outside of those places, outside of the world religions and how they use music, and outside of Greek philosophy, the idea that music is a moral influence and that it impacts your character and your constitution as a person, your makeup as an emotional, spiritual being, is totally unknown. And people hear that and they just feel either blank or scared. Because again, going back to this question that we talked about of the value judgments, and people are afraid of being beaten with a hammer of value judgments, and are not accustomed to dealing with the substance of the, if music is, cultivating a sense of heroism, or cultivating a sense of solemnity in you, or cultivating a sense of unbounded and deep joy. These sorts of things are positive influences. It's not scary to talk about the positives, but it can be scary for people to talk about the other side of things, like, okay, this is cultivating a wild animal thing in you. It's activating and energizing and reinforcing a wild animal kind of impulse. And is that a good thing? That's a question people are not used to dealing with. Mm-hmm. And, just to bring up a historical example, when Elvis Presley came onto the scene in the 1950s, and other people doing similar kinds of music, the general public, not counting the younger generations, but the general public had the response of, oh my God, this is horrible. And this is jungle music, and this is primitive. And he was called a hoochie coochie dancer, and all these aspersions. And the entire priesthood went intensely into activism mode of, we need to denounce this in the strongest possible terms. But the younger generation, the baby boomer generation, by their power of numbers and their different emotions, shouted that down mercilessly. And everyone assumed, okay, all of these wacko priests were so restrictive and so, controlling and repressive and so on, that thankfully we who are liberated from the shackles of of limitations on our emotions shouted them down, and they needed to be shouted down, and the baby boomers are triumphant with their counterculture. But actually, those priests were absolutely correct. Absolutely spot on. And people don't like to hear that. I'm not religious, and I'm not saying it's because God said so. It's just that they happen to be the people who were concerned with spiritual matters and who were fully registering what was happening on the cultural scene and seeing what was lost from the past and where this would lead in the future in terms of what kind of soul people would have, what kind of character people would have, what kind of culture society would embody. And it's a huge inflection point. But it's a perfect example for getting to the heart of all of these issues, because it explains a lot about the world we live in now, and it's a very rich lesson in the moral influence of music and the ways in which people have known of the moral influence of music, and the ways in which people have wanted to plug their ears, like you said, and say la la la. We don't talk about that. We don't think about that. We just go with the flow.
Yes, absolutely. And you could say one more thing is that, and if we were to get serious about music again and understand the power of music as a moral influence, as a direct influence on our values, right? That it actually gives us a way forward in terms of how we can make our culture better.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. And, Plato, at least this quote is disputed whether it actually came from Plato, but if it didn't, it's very close to something that the Greeks would have said. If I can write the songs of nations, I don't care who writes the laws. Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream from culture. And that absolutely is true. That the way people vote and the laws that they want and the expectations they have for tax rates and red tape and all of these other things are all derivative influences from what kind of person they are. And what kind of person you are is influenced by parenting, by education, by all of the arts and culture, by movies, by conversations that people have about them. Is the conversation about the movie, an airhead conversation of, totally, I thought that was so scary. That is a nothing conversation versus talking about the substantive message and influence of the film. And so I'd be very happy if people started to have the kind of substantive conversations about culture and music in particular today that actually people used to have. Because even if you look back to the 1950s, and I'm thinking of the serious music world now, orchestral pieces, if Leonard Bernstein wrote an orchestral piece, everybody in New York in the cafes was talking about, it's a symphony, right? It's a purely instrumental piece of music, and everybody is talking about it as a cultural event, just like they did with the Beethoven symphonies when Beethoven was alive. It was a very big deal when one of those came out. And today some orchestra premieres a new symphony and everybody just says, ho hum, whatever, and go to Starbucks. And nobody grapples with the statement that music makes anymore, and it's partly because of, and this would carry us into some of the other influences that are going on today. The influence of. Yeah,
so let's wait on this, because this, I mean, this is what's so great about your work, right? It's about music and it's about values and emotions, but it immediately has cultural ramifications. After cultural ramifications, both in terms of recognizing what's happening and what's different, right? Where things are actually deteriorating, where culture is disintegrating, and where the selves that culture creates are disintegrating versus where they are integrating, and what's possible. And so, but to pause,
absolutely,
to pause that for a moment, because I want to take us a step back.
Okay.
I want to take us a step back, which is that everything that we've been saying is predicated on this idea that music actually does impact your moral character.
Right.
Right? And so I'd like you to spend just on the highest level, right? How is it that music impacts the emotional character? What you talk about the three major dimensions. You talk about three major dimensions of dynamics about that happens in the music and happens in your character. And
Mm-hmm.
if you could sort of talk about that in the sonata form, like in the short form, like how can
Okay.
music guide our moral character, positive and negative? And I understand this is, I'm asking you to summarize your book in a short form. And there we go.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. So the starting idea is what I call the psychological signature of an emotion. It's a distinctive set of measurable aspects of motion of the mind. And we know the psychological signatures of the various basic emotions from ordinary life, and we can identify them in music as well. I like to look at the ones in ordinary life first, because otherwise you're begging the question to say, this is a joyful piece of music, and then you come back and say why it's joyful. There's some commonality that we can identify between the musical experience and the experience of ordinary emotions. There's the speed aspect of things, that the mind can race, and there are different emotions in which the mind will race. There's anxiety, which is a negative, dark emotion, a painful emotion in which the mind races, but there's also eagerness, and that is an optimistic, bright, future-looking, positive, pleasurable type of emotion. So there's two parameters now showing up. One is speed aspect, and the other is the affect, the color or mood, whether it's at root a pleasure or a pain type of emotion. And the human emotions are really higher order forms of pleasure and pain. They're more nuanced and varied and complex, but if you boil it all down, that's the basic primitive duality. And the other is intensity, and that's the third of the three parameters.
So
intensity,
you've
speed,
got
and affect.
you've got the speed. You can be racing
Yeah.
or something. We haven't gotten to the something yet.
Yeah.
So there's the fundamental affect.
Affect.
Is it
Right.
positive or negative? And then you've got
Right.
the intensity.
Right. And so just to address what you were saying there with the possibility of slower emotions, you have serenity, which is the slow emotion. You have melancholy, which is a slow emotion. Pride is kind of more moderate pace emotion. Same thing with rapture. So there are some at the extreme ends of slow and fast, and there are some in the moderate range in terms of speed. And you have the two valences or affect categories, and just that very basic contrast of bright versus dark, or pleasure versus pain. And when you really dig into affect, there's a lot more nuance that you can go into. But the other aspect is intensity. And intensity just means how strong is the feeling. And serenity is, of course, an emotion that's not particularly strong in and of itself. Intensity is one of these words that can be used in a lot of different ways. So the most simple and straightforward musical form of it is simply loudness. That when the whole orchestra is pounding and thundering, that's a power emotion, right? That's a strong, intense emotion. And when it's a quiet music, that is some form of lower energy, lower intensity. And there are other forms of intensity that you can talk about. One of them that's quite important is the intensity arising from the context of the music up to whatever point you're at. So that if you listen to just a certain note by itself, is it particularly intense? No. But if that note is inside of a melody and it's the high point of the melody, is it particularly intense? Yes. And that is because of the shape that led up to it and the preparation. That's something that I learned again and again as a composer, is that when something seems wrong, when you have a moment of music that you're working on that doesn't work, it's most likely not that moment of music that's the problem. It's the preparation that is wrong. And so that's a huge lesson for me as a composer, but it relates to this whole issue of the phenomenon of buildup in music, and that the intensity of a climactic moment depends completely on the full accumulated stored memory of everything that built up to it. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that's true in a film, and the same thing is true in a symphony.
Mm-hmm. So the intensity the intensity, one way of thinking about the intensity is just loudness, right? That's the simple way. But then there's
simple.
the context of if it's a high note or a low note compared to what led to it. Is it a crescendo? Is it getting louder? Right? There's the changes in intensity, and our emotions also have these differences in intensity.
Yes.
And so the experience of an emotion in terms of intensity, like you were saying, serenity is kind of a low intensity.
Yeah. And you would never say, I feel very gently furious with you. You would never say, I'm very calm, but I'm ready to punch something. Emotions are distinct in terms of their intensity. And sometimes there's a wider range of intensity that an emotion concept covers, and sometimes there's a narrower range. Joy is an interesting concept because it covers a very wide range of intensity. There's some pretty low energy things that are still happy music, and there's some things that are thundering and glorious, and that's also joyful. So joy covers kind of a wide range of intensity, whereas serenity, there's no such thing as powerful serenity, right? Or extremely extroverted or thundering serenity.
My serenity was so intense. It was
right. It's like in the was it Seinfeld? No, it was a different comedy show where the guy has serenity now, and he says it shaking his fist.
Yes. Okay. So our emotions, if we actually look at our emotions, we can recognize that emotions have different signatures, different combinations of this intensity, right?
Speed and affect.
And the speed and the affect.
Right. So that.
Yeah. Okay. So that's part of our lived experience of our emotions. And if we examine our emotions, we can start to notice the patterns. In fact, you have a nice little chart where you map out in the 3 dimensions where different emotions go. And that's a great guide to start to introspect and notice, my emotions do have different flavors. There are different dimensions to my emotions, right? And then music also has these similar dimensions.
Exactly.
And so when the music changes, it just impacts us, or how do you understand that?
It is manifesting that signature in your experience. It's creating the motion with that set of parameters, with that set of motion characteristics. So just to give a couple of examples, the signature of joy is medium to high intensity, fast, bright emotion. The signature of anger is high intensity, fast, dark emotion, or painful emotion. The signature of anxiety it's a species of fear, is it could be low intensity, right? But it's another one of those ones that covers a wide range of intensity. Low to high intensity range emotion that is painful and fast. It's very fast anxiety. So those are some examples. Serenity is bright, slow, and low intensity. And these are the basic signatures. I haven't covered all of them, but that's a sample of how they're defined in my theory. And it all comes from me asking in the first place, well, I suppose to get into that, I'd really have to back up to why I put the question the way I do and how I came up with the answer. Let me not go there until you finish what you wanted to say.
Fascinating. Read the book. Okay. Okay.
Did you want to go in?
Well, no. So let's not. So with that basic understanding, that the reason that music is unlike any other art form, right? It's because it's real time and it's directly impacting your emotions in a sense without interpretation. You can add levels of interpretation on it, but just the direct experience of it, if you're paying attention to it, moves you.
Yes.
Because
and it's
of
conceptual. Yeah, I was going to say it's conceptual as a matter of interpretation only afterward. It's not created by words. It's not an experience that is constructed by language in any way. It is direct sensory emotional experience.
Mm-hmm. And we can interpret it, and
I I was just going to say, which is why I call it the psychological signature and not any kind of construct or deduction or association or anything like that.
Yes, that there's a neurological signature.
Yes.
Of the various emotions as mirrored in the music, and then as we hear it, it creates a psychological, phenomenological structure.
Yes. Yes.
Signature.
Structure over time. Yeah.
And that signature, there's a psychological signature of the experience that comes from the neurological signature of the dynamics inherent in the music and the piece.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I'm putting forth the... Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm putting forth the concept of the neurological signature as an indication of the underlying physiology in the nervous system. I don't claim to be a neuroscientist and have, the exact tracking of this circuit of these neurons in the cortex or, that level of detail. That's a question for special scientists to look into. But I am carving out the basic concept of the physical level signature, which is to be looked for, to be sought out, to be researched, which is the neural signature, and the psychological signature, which we already all know by direct experience, and which we can measure, and which is the same from person to person, and therefore not subjective.
Yes, and what's exciting is that over the course of the next decade, as our brain scanning instruments increase, we're going to be able to refine your system. I mean, if we take your this fundamental idea that it's the match, it's the congruence between the dimensions of music and the dimensions of our experience that have this direct contact, we can actually take different kinds of music and have people listen to it and track the kinds of neurological experiences they're having and refine the system. But you're setting a context in place. I'm looking forward to the refinement of this process, of this basic idea through actual neural data, which I expect us to have in the next 10 to 20 years in a way that makes this, that proves your theory. I'm looking forward to this.
Well, then this gets into a question of interpretation, because I would say that is all supplementation to what is provable fact, and not proof. I think that if we counted scientific research into the brain as proof of our emotional experience, that is fundamentally backward.
Supplement.
Because,
it's supplemental experience that will allow us to refine the theory, and the supplement will provide a kind of evidence for a certain kind of people that will deepen the appreciation of the theory. I'll absolutely agree. Your theory does not require that in order to be proven true.
Right. That is what I'm saying. And a lot of people have a strong materialistic bent today and trust any kind of CAT scans, but don't trust any concepts of consciousness that are derived from knowledge experience, even if they are measurable. So
my suggesting that, like, brought up that concern with you. I agree with you on your concern.
Yeah.
I'm gonna table that. Another fascinating conversation.
Right.
I'm telling you,
Right.
we've got a lot of them. Okay.
Yeah.
So now I want to bring back the idea of a sonata.
Yeah.
Right? Because it was in the book, it was one of the most powerful pieces that I took away from the book. And I'm going to describe it kind of the way I understand it so that you can refine and correct. So because the music directly impacts our emotional experience, and so we can listen to a piece of music and feel agitated. We can feel anxiety listening to the music because the music, it has the signature of anxiety, right? Because of that, the kind of music that we're listening to impacts us. But even more, we don't just experience an emotion. We experience emotions through time. And those emotions grow and develop. And psychological development, right, is about feeling an emotion and then learning from it and then expanding into the next emotion and integrating it and expanding into the next emotion and integrating it. And in the process, we become more psychologically whole. And music can
Exactly.
actually guide us on that path. Some music leads us to integrate ourselves, and some music leads us to disintegrate ourselves. And you talk about that in terms of a sonata, but I'm just going to give it to you
Yeah.
with that framing.
Okay. That is an exactly accurate summary of the main point, which what I call emotional integrity or self-integration. That's at the heart of the whole book. And it comes from just what you said, that the psychological signature pertains to a few seconds worth of music or of ordinary experience, because to form a concept that this is serene or this is angry, or I am serene or I am angry, requires that the factors remain constant. So that if the intensity level is changing a lot or the pace is changing a lot, then maybe a different concept is going to become the applicable one after that. But assume you're keeping these constant for a period of time. And that's where we get our basic concepts of music. But that's only the beginning, serenity, rapture, pride, anxiety, anger, these ones. Those are our basic concepts. But things in music and in life experience unfold over time. And there's a possibility of a connected sequence. And this is where, in a way, a fourth parameter comes in, which is that there are emotional states which are complete in and of themselves, and that are other ones that are incomplete in and of themselves. And the somewhat complex point is that the completeness or incompleteness does not map onto positive or negative, or fast or slow, or strong or weak. It's a separate factor, because you can have a serene mood with tension, and then the tension eventually resolves. You can have some kind of finality within an angry mood. If I have a fight and then storm out of the room and slam the door, that is an end point, right? So there's some kind of finality there. It's some form of closure. Maybe it's not complete resolution in every sense of the word, but it's some form of closure. So completeness versus incompleteness is a very important thing. And the whole need of the human psyche is to translate incompleteness into completeness, to convert the incomplete into the complete, to harmonize, to resolve, to integrate. And this is what's needed in life in general, to bring harmony to your own soul. And this is what good music does, is that it takes you through a course of establishing some kind of emotions which are incomplete or conflicted. Maybe there's some kind of jarring juxtaposition or opposition. There's some unsettling element. There's some drive. There's something that needs to be solved, integrated, completed, settled. And the music then takes you through the process of breaking that down and taking the component elements and looking at them from every different angle. And it's almost like starting with a puzzle. And you're, manipulating the puzzle pieces around to see, does this one fit here? No. Okay, these pieces go together. Now what about over here? These match in color. Let's put them together because they're the same color. Now these are all the same shape, so they kind of are hard to sort out, and that's what you do when you do a puzzle. And then over time, the puzzle takes shape, and then the last puzzle piece goes into place, and bam, there is the whole. Yeah, exactly. The full picture then comes into form. And that is what music does. It rearranges the puzzle pieces emotionally. And if it's good music, if it's humanistic, healthy music, then it comes together in the end. It resolves what had been incomplete. It brings closure. It brings resolution to this process. And you mentioned sonata form, which is thought of as just a technical concept of musical form, but actually it's the sort of a perfect prototype in music. It's not the only one, but it's the most vividly essentialized prototype of this process of establishing some incompleteness or conflict, taking it apart, and then putting it back together and resolving it. That's why we have an exposition where you put forth the themes with the element of contrast and conflict. Then there's a development section in which you take apart the themes and transform them in various ways. And then there is a recapitulation in which the themes come back, but now the conflict is resolved. And oftentimes there's a coda where you drive home the fact that there's a satisfying resolution. So that's what sonata form consists of, and that is the archetype of the process of self-integration. It's a microcosm of the whole of human life, in the sense of starting with the need of growth, and the need to resolve conflict, and the need to bring order to your mind, and the need to integrate your animal level emotions and your higher order good judgment, which are two things that don't automatically weave themselves together. All of these aspects of life are something that music, in this micro model, if you will, exactly recreates and provides us a model for, teaches us. It teaches us the process of self-integration. And it's because of this basic need to complete the incomplete inside of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. That the process of living, one of my mentors is a gentleman named Jason Alexander. Mm-hmm. And he used to talk about 4-letter words. And 2 of the 4-letter words he would talk about were self and soul.
Okay.
Right? That these are words that they're very difficult to talk about. Like, you start talking about them and people get really kind of upset about them. And he the way he described them, he says that soul is what is common to all human beings. And self is the particularization of soul which is unique to each human being.
Okay.
The self is what we create.
Yes.
With our soul.
Yes.
Right.
I agree with that.
And that self is this integration process. It's the recognition of the various elements of our experience, which on first level are in conflict with one another all the time. We talk about mind versus body and emotions versus, right? And logic, different emotions in conflict and different values in conflict, right? That the process of confronting what it means to be human, right? In this moment, we're awake and we have a lot of desires, which are not easily integrated. It requires creativity and understanding and practice to tease pieces together until they can integrate into something powerful. And that process of creating a self, of refining ourselves, of defining ourselves, of growing ourselves, is this process of self-integration, as you've just described.
Yes.
And music has the capacity to facilitate that or to frustrate that.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Right? And this is why
we went through the positive pattern.
What?
I was just going to say we went through the positive pattern, but you're now bringing up the negative one.
Right.
Go ahead and say what you're saying.
Great. So now we've established the basic idea of the book, and this or one of the basic ideas. Again, I love encountering works that make me think all kinds of thoughts. Right? There's so much of your book that I'm reading it and I'm going, yes, but right? And
well, that's like, you remember earlier I told you the woman read my play and she said I loved it and I hated it.
Yes.
I said that's how you're supposed to feel.
Yes, and that's the sign of a great work, right? So I had the great advantage of when I got your book, I had met you.
Yes.
And I knew that if I found your book intriguing, I was going to be interviewing you. So, or I would be requesting that, and that I was hoping you would say yes, and we'd be able to have this conversation, and may this only be the first of many. So as I'm reading it, I'm going, right? Because I agree with you. And whenever you put forth a provocative thesis, it's always partial. There's always all kinds of unanswered questions in it. And I'm looking forward to getting these questions answered.
Okay.
So you put forward the basic idea, which is that there's a psychological signature to music. That our emotions have a psychological signature, and that the music actually triggers or resonates. We resonate with the signature in the music, and we feel. Then you take that and you can say that can lead towards integration of high value human emotions,
Yeah.
or it can further less human emotions, less beautiful emotions, and more animal emotions.
Yeah.
And it can lead to more disintegration and more integration. And that's why music and culture, the music that a culture finds to be valuable, is both a symptom and a driver of the moral development of that culture. Because if you listen to
Absolutely.
music that doesn't integrate, or if you listen to music that highlights and drives you into states of non-integration,
Right.
that has a profound impact on your moral character. And when groups of people do this, and when entire societies, right, when you in the book you talk about, you know, Beethoven's coming out with a new piece, or right,
Hmm.
these composers are coming out with these new pieces, and the entire culture is alight with it. Like, that's what they're talking
Yeah.
about. It's like, what is this music,
Yeah.
and why does it matter, and what's the beautiful part, and like that kind of conversation is a high level, emotional, self-integrating conversation culture.
Oh yes. Oh
And when
yes.
you contrast that with the Harlem Shake, right? Or you when you contrast that with some kind of popular piece of music, which is, it doesn't lead to integration, and it furthers the animal side of us rather than the human integrative side, that has a
Yeah.
profound
So
impact. So great,
be
go.
yeah, be careful with the word popular, because people tend to think that popular means the kind of music that is popular right now today. But the point that I always want to make is the word popular is a purely statistical concept. It just means the kind of music that numerically has a lot of fans. And there's music that was popular with the public in ancient Greece. There's music that was popular in Vienna in the 1700s. There's music that was popular in China over the last 3,000 years. Same thing with Indian classical music, 3,000-year-old tradition. There is music that was popular in Harlem in the 1940s. There's music that was popular in New Orleans in the 19-teens. You know, there are all kinds of potential different subdivisions, and I would further argue that it's a loaded and biased concept, because the minute people hear that something is popular, they think, "Ooh, everybody likes this. Maybe I'll like it too." And so it is a prejudicial term. Uh, Dvorak's New World Symphony is the most often performed symphony in the entire repertoire. It's extremely popular. It has been loved by audiences for over 100 years. It's extremely popular. Same thing with the Beethoven Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy. Extremely popular, enduring popularity throughout the world over decades and decades and centuries.
Mm-hmm.
So I very much want to disrupt people's use of the term popular with regard to music. But if you do have, as most people do, a very narrow view and look at the public that we have today and what is popular with the public that we have today, well, it's very degraded. You can't really use the word degenerate anymore, because the Nazis used that in monstrous ways. But the point is that there's a hierarchy of our being. We have things in common with very primitive vertebrates, like reptiles, like hunger, like a sex drive. I don't know how it exactly works for reptiles emotionally, though. Then you've got the mammal layer of our being, which brings in some new parts of our emotional repertoire, and those include most especially warmth or affectionate feelings and playfulness. That these are two things that are exhibited by mammals that are not exhibited by other.
And shame and status.
Yes.
Yes, on the negative side, but yes.
Social hierarchy emotions,
Yes.
dominance and submissiveness. Yeah, absolutely, yes. And then when you get to the fully human level, there are ways you can break this down more finely, but just to broadly say it. The fully human level involves our moral and intellectual, our full cognitive capacity. And what we need as beings is to have all of those aspects of ourselves become one, have them all be harmonized, so that we are not, just to take a simple example, acting like animals at the dinner table. Just a familiar and sort of maybe almost a cliche type of example is, if you give a dog a plate of food, the dog, his face goes directly into the food and he devours it as fast as possible, making all kinds of noises and slurping it up, and then the plate is empty. And we teach children that maybe sometimes if you are hungry, you have that instinct, but you're in company with other people and you are not just an animal. You're more than an animal. You're a being who can control his own behavior. And that we demonstrate in interaction with other people by eating bite by bite, by eating slowly, and not by sticking your face in the plate and making all kinds of chomping noises. So that's just one simple illustration of a way in which the human capacity of self-control gets incorporated into behavior and life and family and interaction, which is a matter of bringing together the hunger capacity, which is something we share with the animals, and the capacity of self-discipline, which is a uniquely human attribute. So that's just one example. And in music, it shows up in a very big way, because there's music that does this hierarchical integration, that it brings together all the levels of your person, that it can be visceral in that, gut sense, and, hit you and have power in a full body way, but it's still moral and beautiful and integrative and harmonious and provides resolution and maybe soaring. These elements are part of the picture. And if you split people into the animal part and the cerebral part, then you get two things. You get, for instance, there are performances of classical music that are highly diffident and hands-off and anti-visceral and note-perfect and pristine and utterly boring. And there are all kinds of music that are for, shaking your butt, and while your brain is completely turned off. There's that famous saying about rock music from that guy in the Rolling Stones, Keith. I forget his last name. He said it's music for the neck down, and that's exactly what it is. So I agree with his characterization there, and it relates back to this overarching need of being an integrated person versus splitting yourself into the academic cerebral entity with no feelings and the wild rampaging animal with no judgment, the Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so again, with that foundation, now we look at culture and we look at music and we look at the statistically popular music of our day, right? Yeah. The kind of music that sells 1 million copies, right? The kind of music video, like when I'm listening to music, I will often go to YouTube, right? And I'm looking for, in order to understand what's going on in the culture, I'm looking for, okay, so which pieces of music have more than 100 million views, right? This is a piece of music that has resonated with a lot of people. It's statistically popular. What is it bringing, right? I'm going to listen to it and say, what is it that people are resonating about? And in a sense, I'm getting a sense for what those people find to be they resonate with, because where they're at in terms of how they prioritize their integration, how intellectual is the music versus how visceral and animal is the music,
or how whole person is it,
or how whole person is it tells me something, right? So I'm curious, how do you use this when you're doing culture, for lack of a better term, cultural critique? You look at what's happening in our culture, you look at what's happening in music with the sets of understandings we have. What do you think?
That people think that they are nothing more than chunks of meat. That's basically the simple way of encapsulating it, that the kind of music, so-called music, that people listen to today is it's not even for the neck down, it's for the waist down. It's the groin going wild on its own with no connection to anything above that. It's not heartfelt, it's not tender, and it's not smart, it's not refined, it's not sophisticated. So the head is cut off, and even the torso is cut off. Rock music, I would say, it's accurate that it was music for the neck down. It's not music for the waist down because it does have heart to it. It's not high-minded. It's not morally elevating. It's quite the opposite of morally elevating on purpose. But it does have soul. It derives from the blues, right? And the blues has soul. And so rock music, you could say, is the music for the neck down, and that's what I agree with. But the club music and so on that people have today is music for the waist down. It's even a smaller subset of our being. But the predominant thing that people are into today, from my read of the culture, is rap music, which it isn't music, but it is poetry at least. And what is the emotional content of that? I mean, this is a whole conversation, and maybe we'll go into examples and so on, but I think it's basically the sound of bullying, to put it in just a nutshell. It's basically this dominance thing of like, I'm a threat to you, I'm very willing to commit crimes against you, I am menacing toward you, I'm impervious, I'm invulnerable. And I think all of that comes from an overcompensation mechanism, which to some extent you can understand the roots of it. If some poor kid is growing up in the ghetto and has no way of protecting or defending himself, and he feels completely helpless and completely vulnerable and completely subject to crime and violence at any random time, he has the incredible motivation that you can understand to become hard, have set his face in a way that scares other people and makes them think you can't do anything to me, and to talk to people not as other people, but in a way that's threatening. Like, you're going to come after me, it's like you get in somebody's face, and to just incorporate that whole thing, that whole mechanism of posturing into your being and your bearing as a person, the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you move. And all of your relationship to other people, it's a self-protective mechanism when you expect that you live in a place of dog eat dog, people are going to kill each other, and then that false power becomes your whole sense of self and your whole supposed source of self-esteem.
And when you listen to that music,
yeah,
the psychological signature of that music reinforces and highlights and brings out that kind of experience in yourself.
I wouldn't use the term psychological signature here because it has speed and intensity but no affect. The affect arises from the relationships among the tones. But rap music is mostly verbal chanting without singing, and there's some little blips of musical notes as background, but that's entirely subordinate. It's not what it's about. It's rhyme over beats. And it's not just any rhyme over beats. It's infused with that beastly hostility. It does inculcate into you. It brings up that whole animal emotion. It's not a psychological signature, though. I would only say that because it's intensity and speed without affect. There's the whole mammalian level of our being and the whole human level of our being is utterly deleted from that. There's no tenderness, there's no playfulness, there's no warmth, there's no sophistication. There's verbal sophistication, yes, but not what I call the psychological signature. There's no expression of that form of motion of high-minded experience. It's not there. It's completely gone. It's non-melodic music. It's not a fabric of harmony. It's not orchestrated. It's not. You wouldn't say that a certain rap uses a certain scale of notes because it uses maybe 3 notes and just bops around on those few notes. It's a little earworm thing that goes coinciding with the chanting. So it's not a psychological signature, but it is, activating something in you and
excellent. I'll say two things about that. One of the things I notice about that kind of music, which I've spent a fair amount of time listening to it to try to understand.
Yeah.
Right. And when I get into that particular groove, I get that kind of feeling, and there is a sense of power and a sense of aloofness and a sense of It's like, and that it's like like that.
Yeah.
I definitely get that, and there's a part of me that resonates with that. I find that valuable, but it's in a sense it's the opposite of a sonata. If a sonata introduces tension and then takes it apart and takes that theme and runs variations on it and looks at it from all these different perspectives and then brings it together into a new harmony such that, I am now more capable of integrating all of those things. It's like all of the pieces of that are now part of me in a way that fits together in harmony. That's exactly what I don't get from it.
Yeah. And what you were saying there about the resonating with rap music, I know what you mean because it is effective. That's why I said what I said earlier, that there's really no kind of music today that people want something that is inept, that's ineffective in conveying what it's supposed to convey. Generally speaking, it's quite effective in conveying what it conveys. Otherwise, it's off the radar culturally. And rap music, the things that people are into, it does resonate, and it is effective in conveying what it conveys, and that's something bad. And
that brings me to another point. So one of my guests, you may know him, Kurt Kiefner, an objectivist writer. So I actually have I have an interview with him called "Killing Cool," and I'll recommend it to you because I think it speaks very much. I think you'll find a lot of compliments in it. But it brings up an idea, which is that most of the rap music that is purchased by white boys. Right?
I've seen among go ahead.
That among certain types of rap music, that when you go to these shows, it's all white boys in the audience. And this speaks to, they are not coming from the ghetto experience where they need to fight and things like that. It's that toughness, the toughness of rap, the disconnected, that offers a sense of power, a sense of identity, a sense of I am someone. And that's attractive in a way that cuts people off. But it's cool because it breaks the rules. And this is you could say one of the thesis behind Killing Cool is that people choose an identity that is identifiable because it gives them a sense of self. Even if it's destructive. In fact, especially if it's destructive. Because to be square versus being cool, to be square is, yes, I'm actually trying to integrate my mind and my heart and my booty, right? I'm trying to bring it all together. And that requires a certain amount of distance where my relationship to pathos is measured, and that's not cool. That's not transgressive. It doesn't break any rules. It doesn't give you a sense of, I'm against this and therefore I am something. Right. And that part of the culture, same thing in rock music. Like I grew up heavy metal. And I want to have another conversation with you just about metal. I know you've had one recently, but I know your book really well, and so I'd love to have this conversation with you.
Okay.
I grew up listening to heavy metal. And heavy metal, there are different kinds of heavy metal. There's death metal, and it's just all intensity, and I consider it an equivalent to rap.
Yeah, I agree with you that it's that what I would call false power. Yeah.
Yes, this false power, this sense of I am a self because I'm not this. I'm not
Right.
impacted by these things. I am intense. I am strong, right? Basically, fuck you at
Yeah.
level 10.
Right. No, these go up to 11.
Yes, it does. So and I think about how this affected my character, right? Is that I also, because my brother was a concert pianist,
Yeah.
I tended towards the heavy metal bands that were classically trained.
Okay.
And so I would listen to, I don't know if you've ever heard of Yngwie Malmsteen,
No.
a guitarist. So I was a guitarist. I listened to very technical guitarists, and I loved guitarists that had fantastic music theory, who
Hmm.
were playing very complex music that was melodic. They had great use of modes, right? It was very intellectually heavy metal music, right? Right.
Yeah.
Progressive metal,
Okay.
right? But when I would get into Metallica and I would
Yeah.
bang my head, yeah,
Yeah.
right? And that's what it was. It was, I want to feel that power. And when I
Yeah.
listen to this music, I feel this power, and that gives me a sense of power. It's
Yeah.
disconnected from everything else. I can't
Yeah.
use
Well,
that kind of power
the
in interpersonal relationships. That gets me absolutely nowhere. I can't use it in my
yeah, that's
studies. I can't, what?
beat people over the head with a hammer power.
Exactly. That's about it. I mean, the one place it was useful was in football,
Yeah.
right? Because I could understand football like a chord. It's like a chord progression, but it's all heavy.
Yeah.
It's heavy. It's heavy. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, this
Bring,
is, even more than football. It's battlefield metaphysics,
yes.
right? It's like I'm being destroyed on all sides, but I keep going and I power through the pain and I'm smashing the enemy. And it's that Carnage Mad Max universe that's there.
Yes. Yes. And
But the thing I wanted to say earlier was with both rap and metal, for a person to have a very strong compulsion or satisfaction of feeling powerful in that situation, what that really means is there's a problem that they don't feel powerful other than that.
yes.
And
that was
so,
certainly true for
yeah,
me.
yeah,
That was certainly true. That it gave me a sense of identity, a sense of power, but at the same time it separated me from my capacity to actually resolve the real world issues in my life that made me want
yeah,
to need power. It was a
yeah,
problem because I would go off on my own and listen to music, and it was cathartic in that very, very limited sense. And so I want to open up
yeah,
the idea of catharsis.
yeah, yeah.
And
I'm glad you did.
and
But
great. So I'll just give it to you. You know your
yeah,
gig.
one quick point about something from earlier. I've seen among my students a lot of small, frail girls who really like rap music, and they come in with the hand gestures and the aggressive talk and all of that, and that just strikes me as I don't know all of what's there, but there's something about being a small girl that that's involved there. I don't know all of what's going on, but just an observation. Okay, but the main point was catharsis. So my idea about the incomplete emotions needing a process in order to become completed, that is my idea of what catharsis means, which basically harkens back to Aristotle's concept of unity of plot, which is very similar, only in the field of literature. And he, of course, is the source of the term catharsis also. And there's hotly contested debate through all of intellectual history about what does catharsis consist of. But most of the time, it is thought of as getting a bad thing out of your system by experiencing it intensely. And it's like as though you could fry out of your soul a bad experience by just giving it so much energy. But that doesn't happen. And one of my standard ideas about this is just think about drug addiction. You know, you would never say to a drug addict, if you just, take 2 days and get higher than you have ever been high before, and then after that, you'll be free. You won't need to be taking drugs anymore. You won't be hooked. You won't be addicted. And you won't even have a process of withdrawal. It'll be out of your system. But that doesn't happen. There's no such thing. What people need when there's some problem in the psyche, some incompleteness, some dissonance, some clash, they need a process of taking things apart and reintegrating them. And that's what I mean by catharsis. And I think I can make some case that Aristotle thought that, although it's hard to be definitive about it because of the partialness of the surviving writing. But in a way, the catharsis idea of catharsis as purging comes from a false analogy with having physical dirt on yourself. Because there was the idea that in ritual religion, you purify yourself before you go into the temple. Mostly in the pagan world, but I think it's international to a large extent, and across time in various religions, the idea of ritual purification is preparation for entering the temple. And this would involve washing yourself in some way, but with the poetic implication of spiritually cleansing yourself, making your soul worthy of entering the temple by being pure. And it's a little comically simplified to think that washing dirt off your hands is going to wash away the sins that are in your soul, but that was the implication. And so for one reason or another, this gets carried over into the spiritual concept of catharsis, that it's the idea that if you could just wipe it off of yourself somehow, you could do that. But then the real analogy would be somehow like burning it off your skin. And here we get to the logical contradiction of the idea of catharsis as purging again, because if you, let's suppose you burned yourself, you wouldn't say, well, how do you heal the burn? You take out a match and you really burn it, right? You burn the burn, and then you fry it out of your body by applying extra heat. That's the total opposite of what is necessary. The body does a process of breaking down the damaged tissue and reconstructing it until it's whole again. That's how the body works, and the soul works analogously, that there are psychological or emotional elements which are harmed, damaged, impaired, whatnot, and they need to be taken apart and put back together again. I've got a lot of things about the catharsis thing to say. There's a logical contradiction in the idea that you can decrease something by increasing it. That you... The classic emotions that Aristotle referred to were pain, fear, and pity. It's particularly interesting that he thought pity was something that you needed to get out of your system. A dangerous temptation that would maybe make you go against justice, which not something that people would think of as that needs purging today, but he did. Pain, fear, and pity are the things that he thought needed a cathartic process to, quote, get rid of them. There's a whole wrong mindset in this idea, and I'm not saying this is necessarily Aristotle in proper conception, but there's a whole wrong idea that something that's inside of you, you want to somehow get rid of. That's not how the human mind works. I mean, it's not like you have an infection on your hand, so just cut it off. I mean, in an emergency situation, you would do that, but ideally you would be able to heal the wound, right? And there are organic internal methods of healing the wound that are not the same as this drastic, desperate, crude...
That are sonata-like.
Yeah, exactly. The internal healing process is exactly analogous to the take it apart, put together. And the alternative is that analogy of, cut your hand off because it's infected. It's an incredibly crude way of doing things, and sometimes historically has been necessary. But I don't think that there is such a thing as purging in the soul. I don't think that approaching problematic states of the mind in terms of wanting to, quote, get rid of them, just make them go away, is a wrong... I don't think that's a right approach. I think it's a very wrong way of coming at things. Because, first of all, it's inherently setting yourself against yourself in some way. And on the one hand, you want to say, well, yes, okay, so if you've got a neurotic emotion, let's say that you're feeling jealous of somebody when you shouldn't, you don't want to just, quote, be tolerant of that, but you can't say, oh yeah, I need to purge that jealousy by doing what? Beating the crap out of the other guy? That probably would dissipate it to some extent, but neurotic emotions don't go away by being intensified. It's like the guy in the opium den. He's hiding from his emotional problems and his difficulties in life, and covering it up with opium doesn't change anything. And the other thing is, the idea of catharsis as purging becomes the ultimate excuse for anything bad. Because you could say, oh, well, why are you in a satanic cult? Well, I felt a little bit of temptation toward it, and I thought that in order to get rid of that temptation, I should go all the way. And, not to get too grisly about it, but think of monstrous crimes, right? Jack the Ripper felt these horrible desires to do horrible murders, and are you going to give him the argument that, oh, he needed to purge it from his system by acting on it? That he needed to experience intensely the murder feeling and have that experience in order to, quote, purge it from his system, which, by the way, then it doesn't get purged because that's not how the mind works. It becomes an automatic rationalization for anything bad and for any crime. So it's extremely dangerous as a misdefinition of a fundamental human.
Especially when you combine it with, we don't want to have better or worse. We don't want to say that some things are more developed than others. And we don't want to say that we need to have this head thing with all that reason and
right.
and
logic,
and self-discipline.
Right.
We don't want to integrate, we don't even want to say that that's good. In fact, we want to say that it's bad so that we can continue to cathart.
Right.
Right.
And behind
that's a cycle of self-justification, which leads not to, okay, I listen to heavy metal music, I listen to this album, and I go, got that out of me. No, I listen to it again, and I listen to it again, and it has me get more and more into that mindset.
It amplifies that mindset and emotional. It incorporates it more deeply into yourself.
And crowds out the more integrative possibilities. Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so two thoughts, because I know we've been at this for a while. I thank you for your time.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about what does integrate.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And what I'd like you to say is to give people some incentive and idea of the kind of music, why is great music great, and how can you expand your capacity for that greatness and use it to have it take you through that psychological development such that you become more whole.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then and in the same way, but in a different context, if Atlas Shrugged were a symphony,
mm-hmm.
what's its what are the various sonatas in it? How do you I think of got him. Yes. So if I think of Atlas Shrugged as a symphony, it is a great piece of literature.
Yeah.
In the same way that a great piece of music is a great piece of music.
Yes.
And so, if you could just tie that all together.
Okay.
And the thing is, I know you can, and we've only got so much time, but it's...
Yeah. Okay, so all right. So my classic example for the integrative music is the Dvorak New World Symphony. It has enormous conflict, enormous emotional range, from sweet, plaintive emotions to very stormy, disruptive emotions. It takes you through the whole course, and it's not just in everything but the kitchen sink sequence, right? There are some composers that do that kind of sequence. Like Mahler, I think, is kind of a kitchen sink composer in the sense that he goes to this and he goes to that and then the other thing and then the other thing, and there's no connected sequence. But Dvorak is a genius. There's no letting up of the inevitable momentum that is there in the piece. And you can just, it's like with Beethoven, continually sense the progression, and you have a strong anticipation of the arc, right? That if we launched off from here, then we have to follow this course, and then we inevitably must land in that predetermined place. And you feel the motion over that arc, and you get the satisfaction of arriving at the end. And then it's a great, thundering, climactic resolution at the end. And there's a reason that this is the music, not the only piece of music, but one of them, that is the kind of music that is imitated by composers for film scores for heroic adventure movies. You know, when John Williams does Indiana Jones, who is he calling upon? It's maybe a little Tchaikovsky, maybe a little Rachmaninoff, but a lot of it is Dvorak. It's the New World Symphony made in a new version in some way. And I'm not saying it's purely derivative or imitative. Sometimes it is, but that's where they get the Hollywood adventure genre or milieu or whatever you want to call it, that style. It's derived from that, and it's because of the heroic emotions. So that's a great example. There are pieces by Chopin, like the G minor ballade. It has, it starts with these strange question mark, incomplete notes going up and down. That is just like question marks floating around everywhere, and a great melody and amazing arc of build-up to the most passionate climactic moment that's about 2/3 of the way through. So it's that experience through the emotional plot that gives you the conflict and intensifies the conflict and takes apart the elements and sorts it all out and then converges it back together at the end. That is what self-integration experience, the model of emotional integrity, of coming together, of harmonizing your soul. And you can do a lot with that on your own. I would also want to bring in the question of culture and social interaction on these sorts of things, because in rehabilitation programs, for instance, one of the things that they very wisely counsel is that in order to recover from a problem that you have, if it's alcoholism or whatever, let's say, you need a social support structure. And you need to be relating to other people in a way that is supportive of your positive change, and in a way that helps you gain strength from interacting with other people to have the discipline of not slipping back into your old bad habits. And this is why it's so important for people to hear this great music together and to talk about it and to share it, so that it becomes, I don't want to say a communal experience, that's part of it, but it sounds like a hippie thing. It becomes a common bond, which reinforces it. So I would bring that aspect of it in too. Now, to come to your Atlas Shrugged question, that's a hard question. There's no question that Atlas Shrugged is a great novel, and it's so complex. It covers the whole universe and has plots and subplots and themes and sub-themes and little implications. It's like one stream that has little eddies curling off of it in many different directions. And that is analogous to the symphonic process or the sonata form type of process, cathartic process that we've been talking about. And the commonality is the Aristotelian concept of plot. And that's what's the same between motion pictures, literature, music. These are the forms of art that unfold over time, right? A painting has an element of time to some extent because you read it over time, and there's your line of sight that you follow in the painting, and there's the if it tells a story, there's some implications about what happened before, what would happen after. This time element is there by implication to some extent, but it's a simultaneous single moment artwork, a painting, whereas literature, film, music is about the time course. That's its distinctive essence. And so this is what unites storyline plot, which people understand well and can talk about very well, and musical plot, which people can hopefully grapple with a little better if they understand how much is in common with great literature. So I guess that's how I would connect them for the time being. I was afraid you were going to ask me what symphony would you cite as an analogy to Atlas Shrugged, and I can't come up with any example for that.
Yeah,
it hasn't been written.
For those of you listening on the audio only, I'm looking at Matt and I'm stroking my beard in anticipation for when he writes some symphony of that sort.
I'll have to work up to it.
Yes, the Concerto of Deliverance. So, okay. Lots more to say on this subject, and I think we've done a good job.
Excellent questions, I have to say. I enjoyed the discussion.
Fantastic. Excellent. Yes. So, is there anything that we haven't spoken about that you'd like people to know, that in terms of, especially in the context of becoming an Ayn Rand hero, right, of living a progressively meaningful and integrative life? Is there anything that's there for you to say? There may or may not be. I thought I'd give you a...
Sure. I want to say something along the lines of don't beat yourself up, because it's not productive. I am putting forth some value judgments with regard to music. I have a standard of what those value judgments come from, and anybody can understand it and understand the factual basis of it, so it's not oppressive. But I don't advocate anybody beating themselves up. I don't generally view that as productive. And generally speaking, I would say follow the model. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be honest. And that's the honesty in the end is what corrects all ills. It just takes time. So people should not expect instantaneous perfection of themselves or of other people. And I don't mean moral perfection, I mean psychological perfection. People shouldn't expect that instantaneously from themselves or for other people. However, they should expect of themselves and other people complete honesty about what's what, so that, if we are having this conversation about rap or about metal music, people have to be willing to own what it says. And if there's false power and something going on underneath there, you need to have the courage of addressing that. And there's no shame in it, because honesty and self-reflection is virtue. Shining a flashlight into the dark is not, exposing evil. It's enlightenment. So that's what I'd say.
Amen. Okay, so they can get your book on Amazon, right? Emotions in Life and Music.
Where the book actually went up to the #1 slot in aesthetics after it came out. I was very pleased about that.
Fantastic. Yes. And then for people who are in, so I'm guessing that a lot of people who I hope will buy and read your book are not necessarily musicians. Music isn't necessarily a part of their identity necessarily, but they find value in it. But they're going to encounter your book for what it brings them, right? Music is the stuff, but what your book is about is much more profound. It's about human experience and values.
Yes, well, that's because music is profound.
Yes. And to the degree that music itself is a an important context for you. There's also your earlier book, which goes through the theory in greater detail.
Yes.
If people want to follow you or stay alert for what you're up to next and hear about the film version of Can Opener and future music and future musicals that you're going to be doing, and by the way, how do we get to hear the Boston Tea Party Opera?
Okay, so
go.
So the one-stop shop is my website, mzacharyjohnson.com, and you'll find there the link to the Facebook discussion group for my book and my Twitter feed and all the other stuff. mzacharyjohnson.com, and then you have links for both of my books and on my CDs and all my stuff. There's also, I have an email newsletter if you want to sign up there. It's on the website too.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
My pleasure.
It has been a pleasure. The Becoming an Ayn Rand Hero podcast is sponsored by the composer Darren John Lewis, whose music I use for this podcast. If you'd like a custom choral or symphonic piece for your special event or celebration, or if you'd just like to hear more of his music, go to darrenjohnlewis.com. That's DARINJOHNLEWIS.com. Thank you, and see you in the next episode of Becoming an Ayn Rand Hero.